Life happens to us all. There are certain pains, certain disappointments, certain crises, and certain heartaches that we just cannot avoid. They are just part of being human. However, there are plenty that you and I can avoid. Hello, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Lydia and I make faith-based content here on YouTube. I do release new videos every Tuesday. So if you're new, welcome. This channel is all about building our lives on a firm biblical foundation so that we can have a faith that can stand all seasons of life. And if that's something that interests you, I do encourage you to join the family, subscribe so you don't miss out on any new content. And if you've been with the family for a minute or so, welcome back. Hope you're having an amazing one. Us here in South Africa, we're in the middle of a heat wave. Oh my gosh. But God is good regardless. We are talking about becoming unshakable. Last week we spoke about the different kinds of crises that come to us and how it is important for us to prepare and to manage them when they come. Because it's not a matter of if, but when they come, we need to be ready and be prepared to stand firm. There are certain pains that we cannot avoid. They're just part of the human experience on earth. We live in a broken world, but there are avoidable pains. And these are the kinds that are determined by the choices that we make, are determined by the people we surround ourselves with, are determined by the direction we choose, because our life is determined by the direction, not the intentions. The health of our bodies, the health of our minds, the health of our emotions, the health of our relationships, the health of our spiritual life is not determined by our good intentions. It's determined by the daily decisions, the daily direction that we are taking. Because we can take one small step in the wrong direction. It doesn't look much one day, but when we continually walking in that direction, that is actually what's going to determine where we ultimately end up. So you and I need to be diligent and firm that we are gonna avoid the avoidables. Know your enemy and know yourself. The foundation of us avoiding the avoidables is knowing our enemy and knowing ourself. In James, he said, so humble yourself before God, resist the devil and he will flee from you. See, the first thing is humble yourself. You can't humble yourself if you don't know yourself. If you don't know your weak points, he will always go for us where we are most vulnerable. And we tend to be vulnerable in the areas we think we are strong. And because we are strong, we don't actually put guardrails around ourselves to protect us. But because he's cunning, and even Paul said, do not be ignorant of his devices. His devices are the same. He always attacks people where they are weak. And we are weak where we think we are strong. Because that is the areas we tend to not actually put in place safeguards to protect us. So one, know yourself. Know when you are vulnerable. Be humble enough to know that you don't have it going on in all areas. We all have weak points. And all of us can actually be weak when we're tired, when we're weary, when we've actually at the height, when we've been fighting and we experience great victory, or when we're just tired because we feel like we've been fighting, we tend to let our guard down. And the second thing is God, that his tactic is he always tries to question what God has spoken to us. I mean, that's what he did to Eve. He said, did God really say? So if there are areas in your life where he comes at you and says, can God really say? He always tries to deceive us. So know that his tactics are, one, to catch you where you're vulnerable or where you think you are strong, and two, to deceive you or to just twist a little bit God's promises to you. So guard yourself in those areas. Secondly, consider long-term consequences. We never regret making the right decisions, but we always regret the wrong ones. So when you're making a decision, consider, is this adding to the direction that I want my life to head to, that I want my career to head to, that I want my relationship to head to, that I want my spiritual life to head to, where I want my health to go to? Or is this actually steering me away from my ultimate most desire and goal in life? It is not the decisions that we make once in a while, but the consistent decisions that ultimately determine where we end up. So ask yourself, in light of my greatest desire in this area of my life, Is this the wise thing for me to do? Is this leading to death of my dream, or is this leading to the death of my dream? Refuse to rationalize, which kind of basically is, don't allow other people to set your standards. You and I, our litmus test, our standard should be the word. The word is unchanging. God is unchanging. Everything else in society changes. The standards of this world are consistently changing. Let's be real. So the one constant thing is God. So his standard should be our standard. His word should be what tells us what is right and what is wrong. And fourth, run when necessary. Paul said to Timothy, run from anything that stimulates youthful lusts. Instead, pursue righteous living, faithfulness, love, and peace. Enjoy the companionship of those who call on the Lord with pure hearts. Do not play with fire. Run from fire. And most of the time we think of fire or youthful lust as just sexual stuff, but sometimes it's just things that chip away at our integrity, that chip away at our conscience. Our standard is God's word. It's not a matter of, is this thing right or wrong, but is this wise? Is it wise for me to be in this environment for the kind of person I want to be? Paul also said, be aware if you think you could never happen to you, lest your pride becomes your downfall. Be willing to experience embarrassment. In Matthew 14, we have the story of John and Herod. So Herod was the ruler of the day at the time in the setting. So he decides to marry his brother's ex-wife. Actually, he wasn't even an ex-wife. They were still married. He takes her, and John keeps on saying, John was the only religious leader at the time. Was like, no, this is not right. You don't do that. You don't just take your brother's wife. And one day, Herod just decides to throw this party. And as he's throwing this party, Herodias' daughter dances for his guests. And Herod is so pleased and so drunk. He's like, oh, ask me anything. I can give you half of my kingdom. What do you want? Which is the sad thing is, she goes to her mom and says, hey, he says he can give me half a kingdom, up to half the kingdom. What should I ask for? And she says, John's head. Which is kind of scary because I'm like, wait a minute. You would give up a whole half of a kingdom just to get even? Just to shut someone up and not be embarrassed? Just to harbor bitterness? You would give up an inheritance for your daughter, for the next generations? Because in those days, women didn't really have property. They were property instead of having property. You gave up the opportunity to have half a kingdom just to save face? That's one side. But then Herod as well, when he hears the request, instead of allowing himself to be embarrassed in front of his guests and say, no, but he said, oh, I told her I can give her anything. Instead of saying, no, this is wrong. I'm not going to do this. To save face, he kills John, knowing full well this is the wrong thing to do. So I ask you in your life, be willing to face embarrassment rather than give up your inheritance. Be willing to face embarrassment rather than do the wrong thing. Next, use the power of prayer. In Mark, they went to the olive grove called Gethsemane, and Jesus said, sit here while I go and pray. Jesus, in his weakest moment, where he had to choose, am I going to give up the fruit of my obedience because of the cost, or am I going to pay the cost so that I can ultimately gain you and I, which are his prize? He went to prayer. He prayed so he can find strength and be able to pay the cost. So when we find ourselves in tough situations, when we find ourselves in situations where we know we need to run, but we don't have the strength to run, where we know we're kind of playing with fire and we're not stepping away, pray. Wisdom is pray. When you and I are faced with being embarrassed or doing the right thing, and our flesh wants to hold on to its pride, pray. Gain strength. Don't compromise or sacrifice your inheritance just because you're not strong. And 7, have guardrails. We read in Ecclesiastes, 2 people are better off than one, for they can help each other succeed. If one person falls, the other can reach out and help. But someone who falls alone is in real trouble. A person standing alone can be attacked and defeated, but 2 can stand back to back and conquer. 3 are better, for a triple braided cord is not easily broken. Have accountability partners around you. Have people around you who have the same standards as you. Have people around you who have the same goals around you, even if they're not necessarily the same, but they're living their lives with a vision in mind, with a great desire, with a goal of who they, not only what they want in life, but who they want to be as a person. Those are the kind of people you keep around you. Those are the kind of people that you know, when you're staring away, they can look you in the eye and say, fam, what's going on? What's this? If you have people like that in your world and you listen to them, good on you. With guarding your circle of advisors. Yes, it's good to have accountability partners, but it's also good to have a circle of wise advisors around you. There's a story in 2 Samuel, one of David's sons, after David has now passed, he takes on the throne, and his best friend, he starts listening to his best friend who has 0 experience in leading a kingdom. He removes his dad's, King David's, wise, matured, experienced advisors, and listens to his bestie who tells him, no, do whatever you want, you're the king. And unfortunately, this ends up literally tearing the kingdom apart because he chose to listen to his inexperienced bestie who just stroked his pride as opposed to experienced wise counsel. Some experienced wise counsel is not always necessarily, palatable in a sense. However, if they have stood the test of time, if they have fruit in their lives that you admire, that you want, be wise to hold them close. Just because someone is old, I know it doesn't necessarily mean that they're wise. That's why it's important for you to observe the fruit of their lives. And 9, face the truth. I love Old Testament, especially for Samuel to Chronicles, because I think like the characters of the kings and queens, we have so much to learn from them. And again, we're in David's life drama. Unfortunately, in 2 Samuel 13, Samuel's son, one of his sons, rapes one of his daughters. He loved her so much, but instead of actually having the guts to ask David for a hand in marriage, because they didn't share a mom, so in those days, they were half-sisters, it wasn't a big deal to marry your half-sister. Instead of having the courage to ask David for a hand in marriage, he decides to rape her. And unfortunately, when that happens, David is fuming, he's angry, but he doesn't do anything about it. It's like, David, if that had happened to one of your men's daughters, if that had happened in the kingdom, David was a man after justice. But when it came to his own household, for some reason, he just never had the gumption or the courage to deal with his own household issues, which unfortunately, I think it's twofold in one sense. I think because in those days, women were property, he kind of basically took Bathsheba. He kind of raped her. She was a married woman. She would not have consented to just be like, oh yeah, you're the king, I can just sleep with you. So maybe in his mind, he's like, I've modeled this, so who am I to correct it? So make sure that in your life, you leave no room for you not to be able to confront certain things because you have no moral authority to actually confront those things. But at the same time, face the truth, because he did not deal with this rape issue. Absalom, Tamar's brother, David's actual favorite son, developed bitterness towards his father, not only towards the brother who raped his sister, but towards his dad, which is ultimately what led to him fighting David for the throne, which would never have happened. Because he didn't face the truth, David caused more problems. What in your life are you not facing? Are you not dealing with? Because when it's a small thing, it's much easier to deal with than when it becomes big. Have the courage to deal with things and not allow them. Because even in your team as a leader, when the leader does not deal with the problem, the leader is ultimately the problem. Because now you are not the one that caused the thing. But because you're not dealing with it, you're allowing it to cause more damage than it would have. And last but not least, keep your eye on God's purpose and promise to you. In Psalm, David said, "The Lord will work out his plans for my life. For your faithful love, O Lord, endures forever. Don't abandon me, for you made me." Purpose protect us. Having that mindset, that vision of what I ultimately desire, what I ultimately want for my life, what God has spoken to me, keeps us from poor decisions, keeps us from causing unnecessary storms in our lives. So keep your eye on the promise that God will work out his plans for you. God will finish the intention, the purposes, the vision that he has placed in your heart. Keep your eyes on the mark. And then all the other 9 parts will be much more easier. You will be far more willing to make sure that you know yourself and you know your enemy. It'll be far more easier for you to stay in prayer. It'll be far more easier for you to run when necessary. It'll be far more easy for you to not allow other people to stand your standard, because you have your ultimate goal, God's purpose for your life, as the center of your focus and your heart. Love you guys. And remember, yes, there are unfortunately certain pains, certain disappointments, certain crises that we cannot avoid, but there are plenty that we can. If we observe these 10 principles, that we can avoid creating unnecessary pain in our own lives. Have an amazing one. Love you guys. Stay blessed. Keep strong. Bye.